The next topic that I want to discuss is security context and capabilities. So far, I have been inside of a pod multiple times. You have also done the same, I guess. Did you ever notice that inside of the pod, or inside of the container rather, how the processes are run, meaning which user runs the process? So let's take a look. I have these pods running and this job is done. So this is from the previous demo, but I have this config map deployment container running. There's only one container inside of this pod. So let's get inside of this pod using kubectl exec command, and I'll use the bash command prompt. So I'm inside of this pod, or inside of this container, which is running some processes. And this is the process python 3 config map.py. So I'm running this program, which is a very basic Python Flask web page. This is the program, and notice what user the program is running with. The process ID of the user is 1 and the parent process ID is 0. That means the user that this container is running with is root, and that gives a lot of privilege to this particular program inside of this container. And now some of the times you do not want to do that, because let's say you have some other container running in the same pod, or let's say you have a volume mount, and if the volume mount is mounted inside of the container also, and as this program or this process is running as a root user, this user can do a lot of damage. It can go ahead and do an RMRF and delete all the contents of that particular volume mount. That is possible inside of this container. As I said, sometimes you do not want to do that. So that's where security context is used. It is used to run pods and containers as different users rather than root users. Now, what if you want to run as root user, but you do not want to give the pod or the container same permission as that of the root user? Can you do that? The answer is yes. And that can be done using capabilities. So capabilities are used to give a process some privileges, but not all of the root user. So these are the two ways wherein you can handle, you can control the user ID and its privilege inside of the container. And this is how the manifest file would look like. Now the kind is pod here. Of course, you can mention it in the pod template of deployment. What you do here is in the specification section, you mention something called security context. And in the security context, you mention that run the container as user 2208 and as group 1104. So this is how you mention security context for a particular pod or and container. Now the thing is that now what will happen if you set the security context at pod level? So in this case, all the containers inside of the pod would run as user 2208 with a group ID of 1104. But instead of that, you can set the user at container level also. You can change, you can mention this same security context and run as user, run as group after the image of a particular container, which we'll see anyway in the demo. The next option is capabilities. Now capabilities are always mentioned at container level. So as I said, you can mention security context at container level also. As you can see here, we have mentioned after the image of the container, we are saying in security context, we are mentioning capabilities, and we are adding the net admin capability to this particular container. And this is very much useful in Istio, because when we discuss Istio, because Istio sidecar proxy container needs to change the IP tables. For that, you need net underscore admin privilege. So you can use capabilities. So this is what capabilities are. Now let us go ahead and see a demo. What I'll do is in the first demo, I'll mention the security context at pod level, and in the second demo, I'll mention the security context at container level. Alright, so this is the first deployment. So the kind is deployment. This is the name, the labels, everything is set up. In the specification, I have one replicas. So what I want you to see here is the specification at pod level. So this is the pod template. So from here till here, it's the pod template. And in the specification of the pod, I'm mentioning this security context. I'm mentioning the run as user to be 1100 and run as group to be 2200. And I have two containers, SC container 1 and SC container 2. So I hope you have noticed that the security context has been set at the pod level, not at individual container level. Let us go ahead and create this deployment in the dev namespace. Okay, there's some error. The U is small letter. I'll have to change it and apply the file again, and the deployment has been created and two containers are getting created. Okay, there's some error it seems. Okay, see the error. It is saying that for the first one, it is saying the permission is denied because I'm running a Python file on host 0000 and port number 80. So it is giving error. Same is the case with the next one. It could not retrieve HTTP PID. The reason is that I have provided some arbitrary user. That's why it is not working. The user 1100 does not have any access. So what I'm doing here is that I'm changing the image because I do not want to run Python Flask and I do not want to start HTTP server because the user 1100 does not have any access. I could have given access to user 1100, but that's fine. Let's run a very basic busybox image with this command, which does not do anything. Now the second time it worked because I'm running very basic. I'm not running anything exactly. I'm just running the shell command. In the previous case, wherein I was using a Python Flask application, trying to run the web page or the web server on port 80 that needs specific permission. User 1100 does not have that permission. So it is running fine. Let's get inside of each of the containers and let's see how the processes are running. Sorry, bin bash will not work. I'll have to go using sh and do a pacf and see how it is running. So the command that is running for the first container is sleep followed by 1 hour, but it is running as user 1100, which is what we wanted. And if I do the same thing with the other container, I should get the same update. If I type pacf and it is also running, the program is different. It is running sleep followed by 2 hours, but this is also running as user ID 1100. So both of them are working, and this is what security context is. So basically, using security context, you run the processes or the programs inside of the container with some other user than root. You can run it as root, but if you want to change the or reduce the permission level of root, you can mention capabilities. So let's do one more demo wherein I'll mention the security context at container level rather than pod level. So as you can see, the security context is not there in the pod specification. It is there with the container. So in SC container 2, I've mentioned security context with run as user and run as group. So that means only inside of the container, the program sleep space 2 hours should run as user 1100. Let me change it from 1100 to let's say 1111, and this is 2222. And let's run this one again. First, let me go ahead and delete the previous deployment. And now let me go ahead and create the new deployment with a different security context. All right, this deployment has been created. This is the one, the previous one is being terminated. And this is the pod we are bothered about. This is the first container. Now if I type ps-ef, it is running as user root. So this is the program sleep-1 hour, and it is of course running at user root because in the file I have mentioned security context at container level. So if I go to sc container 2, sleep space 2h should run as user 1111. So this is container 2 and do a pacf. As you can see, the program sleep space 2h is running as user 1111. So this is what security context is, and you can enable security context at pod level or at container level also. And the purpose of security context is to run programs as other users than root. If you want to run it as root, you can do it, but you can reduce the privileges using capabilities. But capabilities are only at container level, so you have to mention capabilities with the security context for the container, as highlighted in this section of the presentation.